definitions of zakat is growth. And if you think about it just a little bit, what is the act of zakat? Zakat only becomes fulfilled when I literally take something of mine and give it away. So if I've got 100 in my pocket, I give away 2 rand 50, I should have with me 97 rand 50 left. And yet that act of zakah is described as growth. I'm having less, and yes, it is described as growth. And so there's many ways of philosophizing around that. And one would suggest that one component of growth is the person who is benefiting from your zakat. So a person who has nothing or has very little, you give him your zakat, so his wealth increases. Of course, a spiritual dimension of zakat is that you grow spiritually because you fulfill an amana, you fulfill an obligation, you fulfill a fard. And in fulfilling a fard, you also grow spiritually and in your iman and in your taqwa. But there is also another thinking around what the growth is. And again, let's understand what is one of the objectives of zakat is to circulate wealth within society. And so people are discouraged from hoarding and from, of course, living in a very ostentatious lifestyle, which means that once a person has wealth, he will of necessity spend. And when he spends, that money has a way of coming back to you. If you are in a business, for example, if you are in the services industry, you pay your zakah, some poor person hopefully benefits from it. The person will benefit it almost directly, needs to buy some groceries. Inshallah, he will come back and he will buy it from you. But that's not the intention with which you give it. But that money has a way of coming back to you, and of course, you increase your wealth because you did it with the sincerity of giving. And next year, you are paying zakat on a higher proportion of wealth than you would have had this year. So that's almost, if you wish, a philosophical understanding of zakat. But then we really come back to the root of zakat. So, among the 5 pillars of Islam, the one pillar where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet, take from their wealth and give it to the poor. In so many words, if you think about it, you cannot impose an obligation of Hajj, of Salah, of Siyam, or even the Iman. You can't impose it. And yet they are among the 5 pillars of Islam. And in this particular pillar of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ is given the instruction of firstly encourage them to pay the zakat, but you are asked to take of their wealth. And even in the taking of their wealth, your obligation of zakat is fulfilled. Alright? But let's begin to understand why and how it came to be. And of course, we know historically that zakat only became a fard obligation in the 2nd year of Hijrah. That means almost 14, 15 years after the founding of Islam. The first 10 years the Prophet ﷺ spent in Makkah. He then migrated to Medina. And only in the 2nd year of Hijrah did zakat become an obligation. Some say it was in the same year when when the fasting became an obligation. And if you consider the context where the Muhajir had to leave Makkah and had to come to Medina, many of them with virtually nothing on their backs except for the clothes that they had. And we know famously that in the Prophet's Mosque there was a special place reserved for the very poor Sahaba. It is still a place where when we go for Hajj and Umrah, we try and make some salah in that particular area, almost to rekindle our relationship with the early Sahaba. So we know that there were a group of Sahaba that were extremely poor. And so in that context, if one considers that when zakat became a right, an obligation rather, when zakat became an obligation on one to pay, it almost began to address the need of poverty that was there in the community. And yet the advice of the Prophet ﷺ, or the practice of the early Sahaba, including the Prophet, was not that of giving zakat on your own. It was to direct the zakat to the Baytul Mal or the Baytul Zakah, and it was through an institution, the Islamic institution or the Islamic state, where the Prophet and the keeper of the Baytul Mal was responsible for the distribution of zakat to the known poor of the time. And I think that's important for us in our context, is sometimes we are asked, how should we distribute our zakat? Can I do it on my own? And I suppose that practice came in quite late, late meaning during the time of Sayyidina Uthman, when wealth and Muslims had become, alhamdulillah, much better off 15, 16, 17 years after the demise of the Prophet ﷺ, that what was apparent and non-apparent wealth at the time became difficult to distinguish. And so the practice of Sayyidina Uthman was what was apparent, meaning what we could see, was zakatable, and the Amirs used to go out and collect the money and the wealth for the Baytul Mal and then do the distribution. And what was hidden wealth, people were encouraged then to give that on their own in order to fulfill the obligation, firstly of the wealth, but also of the poor, deserving people in the community. My reading into zakat and the objective of zakat is that at the very least it is known that that in paying zakat you are fulfilling your obligation, your fard, you have done your duty. But why do we do it the way we do it? And my thinking is that the objective of zakat is to help the recipient or the beneficiary of zakat out of that situation to a point, inshallah, where he himself or she herself then becomes a payer of zakat. There is a component of dignity involved in the payment of zakat and in the beneficiary of zakat, so that Auntie Farida, and I keep on using this fictitious lady called Auntie Farida, is not forced to come to your office or to your house or to your door every month or every year and robbing her and her family of the dignity of standing there and asking for assistance once again. The objective of zakat ought to be to liberate the person of need and want, so that inshallah, firstly they gain their own dignity, but also with time, inshallah, they become potentially payers of zakat and are able to then look after others. And then if we consider the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there will come a time when there will be so much zakat, or there will come a time when there will be no recipients of zakat. People will go around trying to find people to give zakat to, and people will say, no, we don't need it, we don't want it. And Sanzaf, we are looking forward to a time when it comes to that, inshallah. But on a more serious note, we begin to ask ourselves, can zakat at 2.5%, can 250 in every 100 rand, can it do that? What type of potential can it have? And so we go back again to sources. And what we know is that in the early days of the Prophet ﷺ, he sent Mu'adh as a governor of Yemen. The Yemen that we know of today probably was equally impoverished as it is today. And he sent him as a governor, and he gave him a few instructions. And among the instructions that he gave to Mu'adh is that take zakat from among them and distribute it to them. Meaning, collect zakat from the Yemenis of the time and distribute it among the poor of the community. Now, Sayyidina Mu'adh was appointed right at the early days when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina. 12, 13 years later, we know the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina for about 13 years. He passed away. Sayyidina Abu Bakr was then the first Khalif. He passed away. Sayyidina Umar was the second Khalif. A few years into the Khalifat of Sayyidina Umar, all of a sudden one day a caravan comes from Yemen. And so Sayyidina Umar goes and the Muslims go and we welcome them and say, where are you from? What are you about? He says, no, Mu'adh has sent us. This is the zakat that was collected in Yemen. Now Sayyidina Umar became a little bit agitated and upset. He says the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ was, collect it and distribute it among them. Meaning, the first right of the people of Zakah, of the people of Yemen, was from the people of Yemen. To not transport it to the Baytul Mal. So after this short engagement, the ambassador explained that, Alhamdulillah, in this year we have managed to sort out the needs of the poor in Yemen, and this is the surplus of the zakat collected in Yemen, equal to probably half of our collection. So on that basis, Sayyidina Umar accepted it into the Baytul Mal, and then did the distribution. The next year, the same incident happened, and the same agitation and the same argument. Why are you sending? We explained to you that you need to give it. The explanation this time around was, we managed to collect, and this is 3/4 or whatever it is of the zakat that we collected, and we couldn't find any poor in Yemen to distribute it to, so we are now sending it to the Baytul Mal. On that basis, he accepted it. In the third year, same story, same incident. This time they explained that this is all the zakat collected in Yemen, and we are distributing it. We could not find anyone of need in the community, and we are sending it all now to the Baytul Mal. Now, jurists tell us one of two things. Scholars of their time tell us one of two things. One, genuinely there may have been an eradication of poverty to the extent where there was no one that he was eligible to receive zakah. Eligibility is the nisab. The same eligibility that makes you liable to pay is the same eligibility that potentially makes you liable to receive. So one is genuinely that there wasn't any poor in Yemen, and therefore the money was distributed back to the Baytul Mal. The other thinking, which has some credibility, is that the practice of the Muslims of the time was such that the taqwa of the poor, the taqwa of the needy was increased to such an extent that their mindset was, we can do things on our own, we don't need, in inverted commas, charity. We don't need zakah. And so they may have been in need genuinely, but the taqwa was at such a level where they felt that, between ourselves and Allah, we will manage, we don't want to take the zakat. And for that reason, the advice was, we couldn't find anyone in Yemen that was in need of zakat. Almost 100 years later, during the time of what we normally refer to as the fifth rightly guided Khalif, although historically he was much later, probably 9th or 10th, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. During his Khalifate, there was also a situation where the keepers of the Baytul Mal or the Baytul Zakah came to him and said to him, we have an excess of zakat, we don't know what to do with it. So he questions them and he asks them, what do you mean there's an excess of zakat? Have you not given all the poor and needy? He said, we sorted out all the poor and needy in our community. That's now, the seat of the Caliphate was in Cairo. So then he instructed his keepers of the Baytul Mal, of the Baytul Zakat, the Amirs, go out into the lands and look for blind people. And appoint for blind people a person who will look after them, and pay the people who are looking after the blind people out of zakat. So they did that, and they came back, they said, we managed to do that, we still have an excess of zakat. So he instructed them further, he says, go on all the caravan roads. Now I want you to imagine now, we're talking about 1300 years, 1200 years ago. Caravan roads didn't mean e-toll highways, right? It meant dirt roads, rocky roads, with camels and horses moving along. If they managed to move 60 miles in a day, it was enough. So on the path, in these caravan routes, set up rest houses for people, musafir khans, and feed the people, give them water, even give fodder and water to their conveyance, and pay that out of zakat. Okay? The story goes further. it now slips me what happened as the next story, but just as an indication of the wealth or the lack of poverty, if you wish, in those two societies at the time. And yet we know, during the time of Sayyidina Umar, it is again historical, there was such a severe famine that the people of Medina, that in fact Sayyidina Umar requested of his governor at that time in Cairo, send for me a caravan from Cairo, the length of which must be such that the first camel is in Medina and the last camel is still in Cairo. And send with them flour and dates and cloth, because there is a severe situation. So we know that during that time there was such severity of poverty and need, and yet within a short period of less than 100 years we were able to sort out the need of the poor and needy. And now we begin to ask ourselves, how did we achieve it? And in my mind, we need to go back to the sources which tells us that people gave readily, not only zakat. They were encouraged to give all types of Islamic charities, whether they were sadaqah or otherwise, number one. Number two is we know that there was still a very strong call on people to look after family. So the concept of extended families, whether they were tribal or otherwise, was there. So there was always that concern among the better off to look after them. And I think we've lost a lot of that in our own society, in our current society. And so that needs to be rekindled among the practice of zakat. How to give zakat, where to give zakat. I think one of my concerns oftentimes is the distribution of zakat should be, in my mind, paramount should be how do we give dignity back to the beneficiary. And when we insist or when we create a scenario for the next installment of their zakat, we actually, the lesson that I want to draw from the story of the fifth Khalif is the priority of zakat. And the priority of zakat should be if starvation, as we see in some parts of Africa. Even in our own country, we have situations where people aren't able to improve their own lifestyles or their own living standards because largely they are paid what Kosato normally refers to as the slave wage. Just enough to get them to work and buy a half a loaf of brown bread and come back the next day. Those communities and those people will always be stuck in that situation. And that's why there is a lot of sympathy from some of us for the likes of the miners and the other unionists who are saying, give us a living wage. Don't worry about the 6% and 8% inflation. Because at 6% and 8% increase in inflation, you are still keeping us there. We can never aspire to something better. And the aspire to something better isn't a BMW. The priority of the very poor who live in informal settlements or even RDP communities largely isn't to buy a BMW. It is to be able to send their children to better off schools, not the government-run, badly managed state schools that are in their own communities. That's what many of us aspire ourselves. Many of us aspire for our kids to be at better educational institutions in the hope that they'll be able to have an advantage over everyone else. Why can the poor and needy not have the same aspiration for themselves? And we know that this is the reality. When education improves, when people's life standards improve, they are able to come out of those ghettos, they're able to come out of those impoverished communities and set themselves up in better situations. Right? I'm talking largely rather than the exception. So I would like us to be able to think about why we are giving zakat, with what niyyah we are giving zakat, and with what objective do we want to achieve out of zakah? So irrespective of who you give your zakah to, whether you give it directly, whether you give it through a friend that you know is good and organized and he's distributing on your behalf, or whether you give it through an institution, the question that you must ask is, how has my zakat made a difference in the life of the beneficiary? And if the beneficiary potentially is in the same position next year, then you need to begin to ask yourself a tougher question about, how can I begin to change that? How can I begin to change that? Yeah. I think we're going to break for Adhan at now, 4:30, or it's going to break for Adhan, inshallah, and we will come next week after Adhan, inshallah. Any advice? Give me advice.
Jamaat is at 4:02, so I think let's go on to just before Jamaat.
22.
Yeah, 5 hours for sure. Yeah.
What we'll try and do is, I'm actually addressing part of the congregation at the Senton Islamic Center Mosque. And so I'm talking in the masjid for those who may be viewing by live stream. So we will have to break for Salah. We will try and break for Salah at 22 for Sunnah and then the Fard Salah. And then I'll do maybe 10-15 minutes after Salah, the technical aspects of Zakah, the Q&A session, inshallah. So maybe just to whet your appetite for that, is to begin to understand that there are a handful of hadith that talk about what items the Prophet ﷺ, and even the early Sahaba for that matter, paid zakat on. And if one considers, there's probably 8 or 10, maybe up to 12 different sort of items that were zakatable during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And if one looks back to what was zakatable, then the question that one automatically asks is, what was not zakatable? So the 5 or 6 that are almost known and common, let me quickly mention them, is gold and silver, and whether it was in the form of jewelry or whether it was in the form of dinars and dirham, meaning money, business assets, animals, and in particular sheep, cattle, and camels, and 5 or 6 different produce, agricultural produce. But these 5 or 6 agricultural produce were known to the people of Medina of the time. So, as an example, sugarcane was not one of those that were identified. Because I'll firstly assume this, that it wasn't a known produce or a product at the time, 1400 years ago. And therefore, it would have been right for the Prophet ﷺ not to say pay zakat on sugarcane, because I think people would have been guessing about what is sugarcane, if you know what I'm saying. So there's a list of about 8 or 9 items. Some of these are in the book that I've got here. They are listed in the book. For those of you who have access to the internet, and you may want to download the book from our website, the items identified are in the book. And so one begins to ask the question, if the Prophet ﷺ's words were the final words, because he was after the seal of the Anbiya, then no one that came after him could add to the corpus of Islam. How is it that we've come to a situation today when we pay zakat and we calculate zakat on items that were not mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ? And I think largely we have much gratitude and thanks to the early fuqaha as well as the scholars that came subsequent to the Prophet ﷺ. Because what they did is they were able to apply their minds and an analogy in order to determine that the Prophet ﷺ would have levied zakat on this had it existed at the time. So let me give you one simple example. There is an explicit hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that says there is no zakat on horses. We will take that exactly as it is. There is no zakat on horses. And yet, during the time of Sayyidina Umar, he imposed zakat on horses. Was Sayyidina Umar contradicting the Prophet? I don't think so. I think Sayyidina Umar was doing what any wise leader of Islam would have done. He was applying his mind to say, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, horses were few and far between, number one. Number two, they were specialized in used in a particular way for a particular purpose, either for plowing the field or for jihad or for riding, etc., etc. But during the time of Sayyidina Umar, when the Islamic Empire had grown so huge up to Syria and other parts of the world, he then discovered that horses were actually a means of wealth, or a measure of wealth, similar to how the Arabs used to consider camels a source of wealth. And because his analogy to camels and to animals was the same, he imposed zakat on horses. And his Sahaba around him didn't argue with him. They accepted it because of the rationale and the logic that he applied in the process. Similarly, we can extend for every zakatable wealth to everything that we have today. So for example, the concept of shares on the stock exchange were not known at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But today, they are known. And certainly, there are people who are wealthy here to the extent of the wealth that they possess or the savings that they have in the stock exchange, then they have physical cash in their pocket. To exclude the one, because the Prophet ﷺ didn't impose it, would be to actually disadvantage the poor, because people, being as smart as they are, would divert their cash money into shares. And we know largely shares are easily transferable to liquid nowadays, to liquid cash. And therefore, the application of zakat to all modern types of wealth that we have is an imperative. I see the time now is 20 to 5. We're going to break for Sunnah, and at a quarter to we'll do our Fard inshallah, and then straight after that we'll do question and answers. Shukran jazeelan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Could the following class please these be removed from the current parking spots and park outside, please, to make way for preparation for the iftar. WFF 792 to Grand Mercedes, CW20 RLGP to Corolla, TKR 399 Hyundai, and VXY 657 is the white Cherokee. Kindly remove your vehicles so we can make preparation for the iftar.
Items that are zakat live streaming, or 8 categories of items that are zakatable live streaming. One is gold, know their own wholesale value. So the value that you put on the bank check is your wholesale value, and that's the value on which you will pay your zakat. To that you would add, in the context of a business, you have a 5%, 8% bad debt factor. I'm owed 100,000, probably 5,000 or 8,000 I won't recover. You'll pay zakat on 92,000 or 95,000. You add that to the value of your book tax. Depending if you are a manufacturing concern, you add your raw materials, unfinished goods, and you total all that up, and that grand total will be the value on which you will pay zakat. Now, in the case of business, and this relates to liabilities, in the case of business, you would be entitled or allowed to deduct against the value of your stock what you owed for the stock. And it makes sense. When I'm valuing my spaza shop, I've got 60,000 rand worth of stock, but I bought some of it on long term on a credit from a supplier, and the value that I owe him or her is 30,000. So the net value of the stock is 30,000. You pay zakat on the net value of your stock. Effectively, that's what I'm trying to say. Okay? The next items that are zakatable is what we refer to as cash and cash equivalents. So anything that acts as a value or a store of trade, you include as part of your zakatable assets, and you will add all your different types of bank accounts are zakatable, including your Hajj account. So if you have a Hajj account, you've saved 35,000, and you're only intending to go for Hajj next year, as soon as you reach the nisab, that Hajj amount, saving amount is zakatable. Okay? I'll take some question and answers after the session, inshallah. We can ask some of it. The next issue is what we term policies and contributions. Now what's important in terms of policies is there are two types of policies. Generally speaking, two classes. One, which I would call sort of imposed on you, and the other that you do voluntarily. Let me give you an example. You work for a company, for a corporate, and they give you a pension fund or a provident fund as a condition of employment. When you fill in your SARS return, under policies you have to put in a value. That, because that pension fund or a provident fund or even that medical aid for that matter was a condition of employment on you, it is not zakatable while you are working. On the other hand, you may be working for a company and they offer you an option to take out a provident fund or a pension fund, or nowadays a retirement annuity. Because the act of taking out that policy was voluntary, you are liable to pay zakat on that value every year according to the market value at the time. And I think that's an important distinction for us to make, right? So whatever is conferred on us as an obligation is not zakatable. Whatever we take out on our own is zakatable every year to the market value. That would go for endowments, education schemes, insurances, and by listing insurances, we're not necessarily suggesting that they are allowed or not allowed. Is that sometimes people take out an insurance, whatever the type of insurance. Some insurances have a savings component. You can recoup some of the money back. The value that you can recoup back is zakatable. The last one, or the second last one, is zakat on debtors, meaning people owing you money. So wherever people are owing you money, you treat that as good debt, where you know, and a joke that I normally make is that if it's your favorite cousin that you know you're given 1,000 rand, is never going to pay you back, don't include that. But everyone else include in your calculation of your zakat. The last one is zakat on shares. Zakat on shares is simple. You look at the market value of shares on the day you're calculating your zakat, and you pay zakat on the full value. Hopefully you've invested in a Sharia compliant fund or a Sharia compliant share, or at best you haven't invested in the likes of SA breweries or one of those haram shares where you are discouraged from investing in to begin with. Okay? The last one I want to come to is what is deductible. Now there's two types of debts or liabilities that a person has. Monthly installment, short-term type of debts, and long-term. By long-term I mean, for example, a vehicle purchase or a house purchase, however you purchased it. We strongly recommend that you do not deduct the full amount that is due, and we even go further and we say don't deduct even the year's amount that is due. Only deduct the current month's installment if the current month's installment has not yet been deducted. But for all your other normal monthly expenses, whether it's the Edgar's account, your telephone account, your wages for your domestic, your food account, etc., etc., if the money is in your account yet, it hasn't yet been dispersed, deduct that from the value that you have on hand and pay zakat on the net value. Okay? So those are the 5 or 6 categories I'm reading for those of you who are following in the book from page 15. So it's from page 15 to page 22 of the book. And all you simply do is fill in the blanks. But to make it even easier in Ramadan, we've invented or we've created the Zakah app for your mobile phones and for your iPads or your tablets. It's called My Zakah ZA. It's one word, My Zakah ZA. And basically what it does, it has a whole list or a schedule of items, the same schedule that I mentioned here. All you do is fill in the blanks and it works out the zakah for you. And specifically for the ladies, we've created or added a feature where it gives you the current value of gold and silver to the date. So for example, as of the 11th of July, the nisab is 5,143 rand 24 cents. the gold value per gram is 524.70, and the silver value per gram is 8.40. I'm emphasizing the cents because I know that many people are using the app simply because when we look at our bank statements and we see the value there that says 355 rand and 22 cents. So people are paying the zakat to the cent, alhamdulillah, which is a good practice. Right? So for those of you who are using the app, it's available on Android phones, on your iPhones, and your Blackberries. It's called My Zakah ZA. It's free. It's 3 minutes to download. And if you called me telephonically and you asked me for values, I would use this. I'm recommending that you use it as well. But if you still want to ask some questions out of the session, the easiest way to get a hold of us is through our website. There's a link that allows you to ask question and answers. You can ask a question and answer through our website, anonymously or otherwise. And inshallah, we endeavor to answer your questions within 48 hours, inshallah. And when you open up the session now to take on some question and answers if people have, even if you asked it to me earlier, maybe just ask it just to encourage others to ask those questions as well, inshallah. So if anyone has a question or so, maybe we'll take 5 or 8 minutes to answer some questions. Yes, brother.
I have a question. So in terms of Zakah on your bank account, just take the amount that you have, multiply by 2.5%, or is there any other calculation involved?
Okay. So assuming that you only have a bank account, meaning you only have access to cash, the first thing firstly is it the nisab? Is it more than the 5,000 rand? Assuming it is, then I'll ask you, what is the value of the bank account today? And you pay zakat on the value today. Okay? There is this misconception. Let me give it to you as a hypothetical situation. My bank account balance last Ramadan was 20,000. My balance today is 30,000. Do I pay zakat on the 10,000 growth, or do I pay zakat on the full 30,000? Zakat is calculated once a year and paid once a year on the value as at that date. And one of the purposes that we calculate and do a physical calculation once a year is like a businessman does stock taking. This shoe or this model or this whatever is not good, discontinue, don't buy it again. So for you to go back and look at your own wealth, I've invested this money with company A. The returns are not too good. Maybe I'll disinvest and I'll move it to company B. I'm currently holding it in my bank account. The growth is only this amount. I'd rather put it somewhere else where the growth is higher. Ultimately, when it comes to investments, you want to have a situation where you generate more than 2.5%. Because assuming you generate 2.5% and less, effectively it's as good as keeping it under your mattress and you are eating into your capital. So one of the objectives of zakat is for you to do a stock take of your wealth and to see whether you are utilizing it to the best extent at which it can be utilized, not only for yourself, but also as a potential payer of zakat, because you want to benefit more people out of that. Alright? I don't know if that answers your question. You are paying it on your current worth as at that time. That goes for everything, shares, etc., etc. Yes, ma'am.
How do we deal with illiquid assets? How do we deal with illiquid assets? Assets that are tied up in property, for example, that you can't easily dispose of and then go back into property.
Alright, so let's try and distinguish between 2 or 3 different types of sort of fixed assets if you wish, okay? You could get an investment in property. I don't want to advertise, I was going to suggest who you should invest with. But let's say you bought either a piece of land, or you got a flat, or you got a building, whatever it is. And you are deriving an income out of the rental. So you're renting the property and getting an income. That's one option. The second option is you've got a piece of land or you've got a piece of property, and let's say you've got somebody staying there for free, your parents or whoever it is staying there for free. In both cases, the value of the property is not zakatable. Okay? But the rental income, or what we call the net rental income, would be zakatable. That's the one case where it's only rental income and the value of the property is not zakatable. But let's assume you are in a construction business or you're in a speculative business, you see a piece of land, you know there's an e-toll going across, you decide you're going to buy it, hopefully and sell it at a profit. That's as good as you buying a container of baked beans. Your intention is to buy it for the purposes of reselling. Then you pay zakat on the value of the property. Alright, so I'm going to make a distinction between property and non-property. Let me give you now the second example. The second example is you buy an investment of sorts which you know at the point when you bought it is a long-term investment or a medium-term investment. You can't do anything with it for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But there is an intrinsic value to that property. You've got two options. The one option, basically, you've got two options on how to dispose of the zakat. You will calculate the zakat every year on the value that you can read to it, the market value. And you can either pay the zakat from your other wealth, if you have access to liquid wealth, or make a note that in 2014 you own zakat of this amount, 2015, and once you are able to liquid or cash in that investment, your first obligation is to pay the zakat and then buy the Ferrari. Okay. Understood.
So just sorry to
Yes.
so to reiterate, if you've got a property with rental income, right? You calculate the net rental, assuming after rates and taxes.
That's right.
The fact that you may have spent that some of that rental now becomes irrelevant, you calculate the net rental and
On hand. Net rental on hand.
So you've got
let's say
the
I'm
rental
getting
and you've
a grand a
spent it.
month, I'm getting 1,000 a month.
Right.
In the end of the year, if I didn't spend anything, I should have 12,000. Let's assume I spent 8,000, I've got 4 left. I add that to my other wealth and I'm paying zakat technically on the 4. I'm getting 1,000 a month, I've spent the entire 1,000. I've got nothing left as a rental income. I'm paying no zakat. So you only pay zakat on the net rental on hand. And it goes back to the question of the first brother, what do I pay on my savings? You pay on my savings on hand. Not what you received and spent, not what you're going to receive in the future. And that's why our recommendation in terms of how to treat debts. There is a suggestion that we deduct 1 year's worth of rental and pay zakat on the balance thereafter. It doesn't quite make sense to me, because are you deducting for the past year's debt that you already paid? Are you deducting for the future year's debt? If you are deducting for the past year's debt, that money is gone. So what are you deducting? If you're deducting for the future years, then why aren't you including your future year's income? Because on what basis do you have hypothetically a bond? You only are given a bond if you can demonstrate that you are able to pay it every month. Okay? So if you've got a bond of 5,000 a month, it's because you were able to demonstrate that you got an income of 25,000 a month. If you can't demonstrate an income, they won't give you the house to begin with. Right? So it doesn't make sense to deduct a year's bond. Now let me tell you where some of the confusion comes in. And in fact, I've been talking about this a while back, and just on the second day of Ramadan, a young sister from, I'm not saying she's young, a sister from Saudi wrote an email to say, I'm coming to South Africa back for my holidays now in July, whatever it is. My rental in Saudi is normally paid in 2 6-month installments. So she pays rental 6 months in advance, in August, and again 6 months later. Am I allowed to deduct my money? Am I allowed to deduct my liability from my saving? In her case, yes. Because the money that she's got on hand right now, she's made an allocation for that. She's designated 6 months of rental that she's going to make out a check for on the 1st of August. So in her case, it makes sense, right? That you allow for the deduction for 6 months, because in the next 6 months she would have earned the money for the next 6 months of income. Now historically, that is how it used to be. Even I think I said correctly, but in the UAE, you pay rental 1 year in advance. So if you're paying a year in advance, it means your bank balance right now you have to make an allocation for the expense that's going to come for 1 year. So you deduct that and then you pay zakat on that. Does that help?
And on your house, you don't pay any zakat?
On you can have 100 houses as long as the houses are for self-use or for other use or for rental income. The value of the house is not zakatable, but the rental income, if any, is zakatable. Or once you intend that you are going to sell the house, it's as good as stock in your hand, and now you become a trader in houses. If you wish for property, you pay zakat on the value of the market value of the house.
See, you raised the question about obligation towards a pension fund problem.
Yes.
Now, although it's an obligation that's condition of your employment, there will be a situation where you would have taken out a retirement annuity, but because you got a pension, which is obligation, you're not taking out a retirement annuity. Don't you just pay the zakah on the pension? I mean, on the compulsory contributions on that basis?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer whether someone would have taken it or wouldn't have taken it. You know, so somebody could have taken, for example, could have invested money in a business as a business return. Somebody could have invested the money in property and for a rental income. You understand? So because of the situation of we don't know what a person would have done in that case, there isn't an obligation on you. The fact that you don't have control and source of how to utilize, the only potential control you have in a pension and provident fund nowadays, fortunately, is you may be asked, do you want it to be in a Sharia fund or non-Sharia fund? If you are lucky, you are given that option. But you are not given an option about amount, and you're definitely not given an option about we are going to take it out. That's not negotiable. Right? So for that reason, it's not zakatable. Okay? Yes, sir.
The insurance policy, life policy that's going to pay out after your death, and you're not likely to benefit from it unless you pretend to die. How is zakat calculated on that policy, and on what value is it calculated?
Okay. Okay, so you've used an example of life policy. So again, I qualify my statement to say my answer does not give permission to take on life policy, right? No, the first question we'll ask is who's going to benefit from that. If you are not going to be a beneficiary of that fund, then you will not pay zakat on it. An insurance of any type, probably you probably get 2 or 3 different types of insurance, but 2 come to mind. Short-term insurance, meaning motor vehicle insurance, etc., etc. You've contributed, you only get money back in the event. Well, you don't even get money back. You get paid for an eventuality. So if you get an accident, you produce 3 quotes, and they pay the cheapest quote, whatever it is. So you don't physically get cash back. All right? If you surrender, you terminate, you lose because you don't get any money back. So in a short-term insurance, 99.9%, there's no zakat. We have other types of insurances, out of circumstance or otherwise, which you take out or you're forced to take out, but may have a savings component to it. After 5 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever it is, you can surrender or you can terminate the policy. They'll give you back a check to some value. Now that value is zakatable. Then you get the third case, is you contribute for the rest of your life, you will never become a beneficiary of it, somebody else becomes a beneficiary of it, and for that reason it's not zakatable, neither in your hand, nor in the other person during your lifetime. After you pass on, it gets distributed, then it becomes potentially zakatable in the hand of the person that has it. The other one that's normally a confusion is the issue of nisab. I gave you the example, let me give you the hypothetical example again. Let's say the nisab today is 5,000. So what are we saying? What we are saying is that if you've held, or if you are worth 5,000 for a year, then you are liable for zakat on everything over that. Alright? Let me give you an example. I got 6,000 in my bank account last year, and today I got 106,000 in my bank account. Just on pure face value, I am liable for zakat because I've held the nisab for 1 year. But let's say 2 weeks ago, I don't say tata my chance, but let's say 2 weeks ago I got a gift or a bonus of an additional 100,000 rand. So today in my account I've got 206,000 rand. 106 I got for a year, 100,000 I only got for 2 weeks. What value do I pay zakat on? 106, 6 or 206? 200. You pay 206. Because you held the nisab for a year, irrespective of what other activity happened in your country in the course of the year, you are liable to zakat for today's value on the basis of nisab for a year. And it's normally the confusing thing for a lot of people to say, but I only got this last week, only got this 6 months ago. If you got the nisab for a year, everything is zakatable to the full value as of today.
So then nisab drops for some reason during mid-year, and then you get to 100,000 by year end. What is zakat?
Okay. So the strict interpretation, so there's two interpretations, okay? The Hanafi school says, if you held the nisab in the beginning and in the end, they only look at 2 dates. Irrespective of what happened in between, then you still pay zakat. The other schools are a bit more flexible, but because we don't have accountants and we don't check on our apps every day, it's hard for you to determine, I don't have, I have, I don't have, right? But for all intents and practical purposes, you would be calculating a new zakat year when you re-achieve your nisab. But it's difficult to keep a track of that. So it's easy just to ask. And the way I ask it normally is, did you pay zakat last year? It means that you had a nisab. Do you have the nisab this year? If you answer both, the Hanafi opinion, then you are liable for zakat because in the beginning and in the end, you've got the nisab. So just keep it simple and uncomplicated. And remember, the idea of zakat firstly is not to put you in difficulty and not to make you a recipient of zakat. That zakat is not a penalty, right? But also the objective of zakat is to help the poor and to take them out of the situation. So do it with that sincerity. But if you genuinely became bankrupt and 3 months and you couldn't manage it, you yourself had to go out looking for assistance, whatever else have you, that's a different situation. Your zakat here will start off once again when you achieve the nisab. Yes, sir.
You only pay zakat. What kind of jewelry is it? Just only gold and silver?
For now, until further notice, only gold and silver, yeah.
If you have like
Platinum, yeah. So again, it's real gold and silver and not silver colored. So the Mercedes that's parked outside and was in our way just now, that's silver colored, you will not pay zakat. Although we'll accept some sadaqah. No, it has to be real gold and real silver, yeah. And it's based normally on the weight. So you have to weigh the jewelry and get a value. That's why I gave you the prices of the weight just now.
let's say if I have a watch, a gold watch, I have to pay.
Yes.
For that gold watch.
Yes, I
Right.
You got an Omega real gold watch that you place a card on it, yes.
Okay, and if you have like a stainless steel watch, it's expensive watch, you don't have.
No. Not if you're using it for personal use. If you are a trader, you're buying and selling watches, then you will pay on it.
Hoosen, just on that, what about other valuable stuff like Tanzanite and all those kind of things?
Like I said, until further notice, everything else is not zakat. Right? The Maliki madhab obliges zakat on diamonds and precious stones. The Maliki madhab, right? But predominantly the other madhabs don't, and for now it's limited to gold and silver. So even platinum, etc., etc. But I mean, next year when the new app comes out, we may just put the platinum in. So don't be too ahead of us. We may just come back to platinum.
Because it's going to come back to the same principles that you referred to previously regarding the sugar cane situation as well.
Absolutely. And I think as a grouping, there isn't yet unanimity among the different scholars to consider that. And I think rather than working with a correct minority view, rather let's work even potentially with an incorrect majority view. You know, and for now it is not obliged. But if you feel deep down that the right thing to do is to pay on it, alhamdulillah, my account details will be Sanzaf's account details will be given.
So, just on the sense of view, the majority of the people poor people in our country would not be Muslims, right?
Yes.
Do you distribute zakat amongst them or you don't?
Okay, so currently, even the zakat that we have is insufficient for the Muslim community. So right now, our priority and our rules direct zakat towards Muslims. But if we ever come to the situation in future, we will then go